I was 25 when I bought the table. It was an impulse purchase, really. The auction house was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of aged wood and mildew. Rows of forgotten relics filled the room, tarnished mirrors, cracked porcelain dolls, and furniture whose elegance had faded with time. The table caught my eye immediately. It wasn't large or imposing, but there was something about it. A dark mahogany antique with intricate carvings of roses and vines that seemed to writhe under the flickering fluorescent lights. It felt alive. As I stood there, I could almost hear a faint whisper, like the murmurs of a crowd just out of earshot. When the auctioneer began the bidding, my hand shot up instinctively. I didn't even know why I wanted it. It was just a table. But by the time the hammer fell, it was mine. When I got it home, I placed it in the corner of my small apartment, marveling at its craftsmanship. It seemed to belong there, as if the room had been waiting for it. It wasn't until later that night, when I was cleaning it, that I noticed the small drawer hidden within its design. The drawer was almost invisible, its edges seamlessly blending with the carvings. Curious, I pried it open, and inside I found a single piece of parchment. The paper was fragile, its edges yellowed with age. I unfolded it carefully, the faint scent of lavender wafting up from it. The words, written in a delicate, old-fashioned script, made my breath hitch. Dearest Henry, though we've never met, my heart has known you forever. The bond we share is eternal, transcending time and space. I await your reply eagerly. With all my love, Eleanor. My chest tightened. It wasn't just the letter's romantic tone that unsettled me. It was the name. Henry. My name. No one called me Henry anymore. Not since my grandmother passed years ago. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. A forgotten relic from another time, left behind by someone who happened to share my name. But the intimacy of the words gnawed at me, refusing to let go. On a whim, I grabbed a sheet of paper and wrote a reply. I don't remember exactly what I wrote, something polite, dismissive, even a little mocking. I signed it Henry and slid it back into the drawer. The next morning, the drawer was open. Inside was another letter. The letters became a nightly ritual. Each evening, I would find a new note waiting for me, written in Eleanor's elegant hand. Her words were intoxicating, speaking of a love so profound it felt otherworldly. She described places and moments that seemed oddly familiar, as if she had been watching me my entire life. By the time a month had passed, I was no longer questioning the impossibility of it all. The letters felt real, her presence tangible. I wrote back every night, my replies growing longer, more vulnerable. It felt as though Eleanor knew me better than anyone ever had. Years slipped away, and my obsession deepened. Relationships came and went, but none could compare to the connection I felt with Eleanor. Her letters were my anchor, my solace. I stopped trying to date altogether. How could any living woman compete with a love so perfect? But something began to change. At first, it was subtle. The letters, once warm and tender, took on a possessive edge. Eleanor's words grew more desperate, more insistent. She began to speak of eternity, of a love that could not be bound by mortal constraints. I tried to ignore the unease creeping into my heart, but then the dreams began. I woke one night to the sensation of someone lying beside me. My room was bathed in moonlight, and for a moment I thought I was dreaming. But when I turned my head, I saw her, Eleanor. She was beautiful, her features delicate and timeless, her long hair cascading over my pillow. But her skin was pale, too pale, and her eyes held a depth that made my stomach churn. She reached out, her fingers cold as ice, and traced a line down my cheek. Henry, she whispered, her voice soft and melodic. We're together now. I tried to speak, to ask her how she was here, but my throat felt like it was filled with sand. I blinked, and she was gone. The next morning, I found a letter waiting for me in the drawer. It described our night together in vivid detail, every touch, every whispered word. My hands trembled as I read it. The visits became more frequent. Each night she appeared beside me, her presence growing stronger. At first, it was comforting, even thrilling, but soon her affection turned to obsession. She began to appear not just in dreams, but in trances during the day. I would lose hours, waking up to find myself clutching her letters, my fingers numb from holding the pen. My body began to deteriorate. Dark circles formed under my eyes, my skin grew sallow, and I felt perpetually drained. Friends and coworkers noticed, but I brushed off their concern. How could I explain what was happening? By the time I turned 45, I could no longer deny the truth. Eleanor wasn't a ghost. She was something far darker. The letters often mentioned an address: 214 Rosewood Lane. Desperate for answers, I decided to find it. The address led me to a forgotten graveyard on the outskirts of town, overgrown with weeds and shrouded in a chilling fog. As I walked among the crumbling tombstones, I felt an oppressive weight pressing down on me, as if the air itself were trying to smother me. At the center of the graveyard, beneath a gnarled oak tree, I found her. Eleanor Grace Delaney, 1890 to 1915. The inscription sent a wave of nausea through me. She had died at 25, the same age I had been when I bought the table. My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That night, she came to me again, but this time her form was monstrous. Her once beautiful features were twisted, her eyes burning with an unnatural fire. She loomed over me, her voice a guttural growl. "You promised me eternity, Henry," she snarled. "You can't leave me." I screamed, thrashing against the invisible bonds that held me down. Her hands, now clawed and skeletal, raked across my chest, leaving trails of burning pain. When I awoke, my chest was covered in scratches, the wounds deep and raw. I sought help from priests, mediums, anyone who might know how to break her hold on me. They all said the same thing. Eleanor had bound herself to me, and as long as I kept the table, she would never leave. I tried to destroy it. I dragged the table into the backyard and doused it in gasoline. As the flames roared to life, I felt a glimmer of hope. But then her face appeared in the fire, her screams echoing through the night. The flames died out and the table was untouched. "Henry," her voice whispered, carried by the wind, "you can't escape me." Now, I sit here, a shell of the man I once was. My reflection in the mirror is unrecognizable, gaunt, hollow-eyed, a ghost of myself. The table still sits in the corner of my room, its drawer slightly ajar. Another letter waits inside, the parchment glowing faintly in the dim light. I can feel her watching me, her icy breath on my neck, her laughter echoing in my ears. She's waiting, as she always does. I don't dare open the drawer, but I know I will. I always do.